Okay, great. So what we'll do for the last, our last 20 minutes or so, if I let you leave, no, I'm just kidding, I'll let you leave, but as we'll look at the other side of the coin. So we've been looking at how psychology affects the law. Let's look for the rest of our time at how the law affects psychology. Now, I believe there were a lot of you, if I remember correctly, how many of you were thinking of doing something like being a counselor or practicing in the field of psychology, like a therapist, a counselor, school psychologist, right? Quite a few of you. So this is the other side of this. We're looking at, did you have a question? Okay, it's okay. So we're looking here at how psychology is affected by the law. So when people receive treatment, they have rights. We haven't always had that present, right? It seems like a really basic thing that you would have rights as a client or as a patient. That has definitely not always been the case. Remember way back to chapter 1, where people were locked away for no reason or really any reason at all. A husband could have his wife committed because she wasn't having sex with him and say she was crazy, and they would do electroconvulsive therapy and keep them locked up forever, right? I mean, it literally took nothing to have people committed, especially women, stereotypically. And so we do have all of these rules and guidelines and ethical things in place to protect people who need mental health treatment. And now we're in civil commitment instead of criminal commitment. So when somebody is in a state of danger, whether that's danger to themselves or danger to somebody else, they actually can be civilly committed. And what that means is they can be held against their will for a period of time, typically up to 72 hours. If you've heard the term 5150, that's where this comes from. That's the police code for detaining somebody for up to 72 hours because they are a danger to themselves or somebody else. And this gets really tricky because you have to protect that person and the people that they might be a harm or a threat to, but you also have to balance that person's rights. And so people have the right to treatment, but they also have the right to refuse treatment under most circumstances. It's kind of like a delicate fine line in the middle. So you have the right to receive some kind of treatment. We can't lock you away and do nothing to help you and hold you against your will. That's completely unethical. We did it for years, but no longer, right? So if you're involuntarily committed, you have the right to receive adequate treatment, medication, supervision, evaluation, but you also have the right to refuse treatment. So if they say, we want you to take this medication, you have the right to say, I don't want to take that, right? Under most circumstances, right? If you are not of sound mind, maybe you have something like schizophrenia where you don't understand what they're offering you, a family member can intervene and override your wishes, but it gets really messy. We don't want to lock you away and not help you, but we don't want to force you to undergo treatment either. So it's kind of like this balancing act in the middle where we protect your rights without unintentionally depriving you of opportunities for recovery. Again, like very, very tricky at times. Yeah.
So I work in a hospital and we get a lot of 5150s.
Yeah.
Like right after, attempted right after, like they have to receive medical treatment. And we have a psychiatrist who comes in to evaluate them when they're in hospital. And this one doctor was arguing with the nurse because one of our patients wanted to leave AMA. And the psychiatrist we can't hold him here.
Right.
We can't legally do that. And the doctor's like, well, why can't you? He's on our 50 and 50s. It's been 72 hours.
Yeah.
And they're fighting back and forth about it. The psychiatrist is we can't do it.
I know.
And I was like, okay.
It gets so messy. And it gets even messier if you have someone who's a minor, right? And they're under 18 and then you get all these other complications. But sometimes people need to stay longer, but if they don't want to stay, it becomes this weird legal, ethical battle where you want to keep them, but you can't keep them. Sometimes you can justify keeping them longer if they are still an active threat to themselves or others. But even then.
Yeah, he was, but the psychiatrist is
yeah. Sometimes your hands are tied, right? Did you have a thought? Yeah.
So what if they are admitting to having homicidal ideation?
Yeah.
But it's been past the 75.
Yeah.
Report
Mm-hmm.
another symptom.
Yeah, and sometimes you can actually have people detain much longer than that. If it's very severe and they're obviously still actively in that state, typically you can hold them longer. But if they are adamant or lie and request to be released, sometimes you have no choice but to release them. Now a psychiatrist can intervene and mandate that they stay longer, but they still have rights to the point where They could technically fight that. It gets really, really messy when somebody needs more than 72 hours, which is a lot of people, right? Like oftentimes when people are homicidal or suicidal, it's not a short-term thing, right? So this can be tricky, very, very tricky, but you can't keep people for longer for sure. Yeah.
I think that one of the most interesting parts of the 5150 is when they 5150 you like before the weekend.
Yeah.
And then if it's the weekend, you're like, oh, sorry, our our outside team isn't here, so you have to wait. So then they extend your 5150 and they just keep doing that. Like it's not they have to make a new 5150.
But there are ways around it, right? Yeah.
And they 72 hours is how long did there? That's like the minimum. Right. Yeah. And there are, like I said, like in your saying too, there are ways around it, but it is like a balancing act. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, because wouldn't like if you hold them for longer, it's like 14 days would be like a 5250 or something.
There's like a couple of different like ones where you can hold them up to a certain amount of time, depending on their insurance. Because who's going to pay for it, right? And depending on like who they are a threat to, if they have like a psychiatric team already in place. Because sometimes when people already have like established therapeutic services, it's much easier to do this because you have everything in place. If they don't, it can get a little messier. Yeah.
So we're actually the weekend thing where they're bringing in like people who work on like on-call psychiatrists and stuff to hospitals and mandate that they like have to be seen within a couple hours.
Yeah. Right.
That's what people were starting to complain about, saying you're being held against their rights.
Right. And that's here, right? Like you can't put somebody in a facility and then not help them, not see them, not evaluate them, and just hold them. There's a really interesting movie. I don't know if any of you have seen it, called Unsane. Not insane, but unsane. It's maybe like 8 years old or 9 years old at this point. But it's about this woman who's tricked into being committed and then they won't let her go. Because the second you're in a psychiatric facility, it's like everything you say is questioned, right? They don't take you seriously. I'm being held against my will. Well, everybody here says that, right? And so they don't take her seriously anymore and she can't get out, right? Really interesting movie if you want like something to watch after finals are over, right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Season 2. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
They said that she was insane and then going at it. I think she was in there, what, 2 years in the season?
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great season. Probably my favorite of all of them, right? The hotel one was wild too, right? And the clowns and so many of them, right? But yeah, that's a great season, right? And it highlights the same idea, right? There are people who are involuntarily committed, people who are getting treatment like electroconvulsive therapy and all sorts of awful treatments, and they have no right to refuse it, which is why some of these things came about, so that patients can have rights, right? It's important that you receive treatment and that you also have the ability to say, no, I don't want that treatment. I have some agency. And again, a fine line. Our last slide, it's a big slide, that's the last one, right? If you practice in the field of mental health and you're a mental health professional, there are an incredible amount of ethical guidelines that govern you, right? And this is probably one of the most difficult yet interesting classes I ever took as a therapist trainee, an ethics class, where you go over case by case and it's incident by incident, you know, what are the ethical guidelines? What's the right thing to do here? It's so like gray, instead of being very black and white. This is a difficult area, but the idea is that there's a code of ethics or like a body of principles that guide your decisions and your behavior as a therapist or even as a teacher, anything in the realm of psychology, to make sure that you are protecting your clients or patients or students, protecting their rights, not taking advantage of them in some way. And so here are some of the big ones, and there are so many more, but here are some of the big ones. First one seems really obvious, but psychologists are permitted to offer advice. You are permitted to give your opinion and your advice on things as long as it is within your area of knowledge and expertise. You must acknowledge your limitations. If you don't know enough about an area or a disorder or something that you have a client with, you actually are encouraged to refer out and acknowledge your limitations in that area. But you can go on TV, you can go on the radio, you can go on whatever and offer advice. You are allowed to do that within your realm of knowledge. You can't conduct any kind of fraudulent research or publish false data. If you do, you could lose your license, you could go to jail, you could be fined or just be shunned in like the academic psychological community. If you make evaluations and testify in legal cases, it must be based on sufficient information, right? So you have to, again, kind of uphold these standards along the way. You can't take advantage of clients, students, like anyone in a dual power dynamic, sexually or otherwise. So as a therapist, you are encouraged to avoid like a dual relationship or a dual power dynamic with your clients. Sometimes this is really difficult to do, especially if you live in a small town or a small like community. So I was training to be a therapist up in Humboldt, which is a very small community. And I would run into my clients all the time out in the world, right? And you are not supposed to have a dual power dynamic. So in theory, if I was still a therapist, I could not be your therapist and your teacher. That would be a dual power dynamic. I'd have too much power over you. I can't be your therapist and your friend. I can't be your therapist and your partner, right? You actually have to wait 2 years. So mark your calendar, I suppose, right? 2 years after ending therapy with a client before you can become sexually involved with them. If you go any less than that, it's considered a breach of ethics. You could lose your license. You could go to jail. Now you see this all the time in the media, right? Of therapists having sex with their clients and whatnot, or having relationships with them. It obviously happens, but you could lose your license for that. You're violating this person's trust by having that dual power dynamic with them. Yeah.
What about, like, let's say, like, can a therapist see like the same people from like the same family, but like in like individual settings?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just have to keep everything confidential,
Okay.
right? So oftentimes what you'll see is a therapist will see like couples or a family, and then they might see the people individually as well. You just can't share what they say with the other people who are involved, which gets, again, tricky when you have minors. And as I said, I taught and was training to be a therapist in a small town. You're not even supposed to acknowledge your clients when you see them in public, because you are giving away a relationship by acknowledging them, right? And so this is something I wish therapists would have this conversation with clients, because it can be so damaging if you don't. But I would see clients and like, I would be like, I'm just not gonna look, right? Because like, I'm so like, if I see you out in public, I'll say hi to you. Like, I'll probably say hi way too enthusiastically. I'm like, I know you, hi. And so every time I'd have to be like, and I'd get all weird, and my partner would know like instantly that was a client, right? Because I'm like, I can't tell you, but I'm the worst liar in the world. I laugh and I smile. But when you see people out in public, you're not even supposed to say hi, because that can reveal that they're a client of yours and reveal that relationship. And again, something I think most therapists should share, because if they do run into you, that can be really damaging. Of like, oh, you don't care enough to say hi. It's actually an ethical guideline where they're not supposed to. There's a bunch of these, even more that aren't up here. Like, you're not supposed to give your therapist gifts. I do this to my therapist all the time. I always feel that I'm like, I'm not supposed to give you this, but here, I got you a cookie, right? Like, she's like, you know better. And I'm like, I know, but it was a really good cookie. I thought you'd want one too. I put her in, I should really stop doing it, because I get it. Like, you're not supposed to even give them gifts, because it creates a power dynamic, right? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 And again, ideally, that's something that you talk about, right, with your therapist, so that you don't have a moment of like, do they not care? Do they not know me? Because that could be really hurtful, right? But it's an actual guideline and rule to protect that client's like anonymity, right? So that you're not giving away that relationship. Yeah.
Aren't they allowed to say hi when you say hi?
Yes. So if you say hi first,
yeah,
they can say hi. Yeah. Right. So if you acknowledge them first, it's totally fine. But they can't acknowledge you first. It's actually a breach of etiquette. Yeah.
So when it comes to confidentiality, is there like a certain time period that could pass where you could tell someone else? For instance,
sure.
One of my best friends, her dad is a psychiatrist and he practices law.
Okay.
So he meets with clients, and then he'll also like testify in courts of law, like cases of abuse and stuff like that.
Okay.
And like he'll sit with us and be like, "Oh my gosh, I had the craziest thing this client told me," and I'm like, "You're
not supposed to." So you can share broad details, right? Like, I would go home, and this was honestly like, and then I've had this conversation with a few of you who talked to me about careers. This is one of the hardest things about being a therapist to me was I'm somebody who likes to talk and share everything with my partner. Like we talk about everything. And to come home and not be able to say anything about my clients was so hard for me. I just felt like it was this weird secret life. You can share broad details. Like I had a client today who's struggling with cancer and it was really sad. Okay. I haven't given away like gender. I haven't given away appearance, name. And like, so very broad information like that is okay. But like names and specifics, anything that would give them away is frowned upon. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Right. And so like saying something very general, like, oh my gosh, I had this crazy, like whatever, but going into specifics technically is a no. Do people do it all the time? Right. Did I do it sometimes? Definitely. Like I would come home and like struggle with stuff. It's interesting because of this, therapists go to therapy themselves to talk about their clients. Okay. Because other therapists are bound by confidentiality. So if I went to see another therapist, I could talk to that person about my clients and give them every piece of information I wanted because they're also bound by confidentiality. So it's very common, almost encouraged for therapists to go to therapy themselves or have little groups where they meet and debrief about their clients. They do that a lot to bounce ideas off of each other and be able to share because it's difficult not to. But it's really frowned upon to give any kind of information. Yeah.
Great show.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I haven't watched it. I have it written down, right? Yeah.
It's not so serious, more so like a comedy.
Yeah. I love it. It's on my summer list, right? I love it. Yeah, and confidentiality, since you brought it up, you know, this is probably the biggest one up here, right? This is important because if you go to a therapist and your information isn't safe, why would you tell them anything, right? And so you want your information to be safe, but there are limits. There are big limits to this, right? So if somebody is a danger to themselves or a danger to others, you have a duty to protect. So if your client says, I plan to hurt myself, you have a duty to protect them and report that. You might consider holding them or getting them into like some kind of help. You have to do that, right? If they say, I am going to go murder my neighbor tonight, you have a duty to protect that neighbor and report it to the police or report it to somebody who can intervene. If there's a case of child or elder abuse, right? So if they talk about any kind of child abuse present or past, you have to report that. Or any kind of like elder or like someone of a diminished capacity, you have to report that as well. Now, here's where it gets crazy. Your client could come to you and say, I killed 75 people 5 years ago, and you cannot report that. You cannot tell a soul, or you could go to jail. Now, if they say, I'm going to kill 75 people tomorrow, you have to report that. You have a duty to protect. So almost like going to confession, right? Like if you go to confession or go to a priest and you say, I killed 30 people or 75 people or however many, however many people, they can't say anything. Right. But if you have a future intent, that's where it gets tricky. So this is a little bit wild, right? That you could have that information and not be able to do anything with it. It gets a little messier when you have like cases, legal cases involved. They can subpoena your records, but you have to protect that information where your client won't feel safe talking to you. Yeah.
They're like, I killed someone yesterday.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, do you want to do it again? They're like, no.
Yeah.
And then they come back and they're like, yeah, I did it again.
I did it again. My bad, right? You can find ways around it, right? So if you believe that there is any chance they will do it again, you could justify reporting if you believe there's any chance at all, right? And so if they still seem homicidal or violent, you could find a way around it. The general guideline is if you make your best faith effort, you're typically safe as a therapist or as like a professional in this area, because people make mistakes. They don't report things they should, they report things they shouldn't. You typically would call a phone number and they guide you as to what to do. And that still stays confidential. And then after that, you would progress through the stages that they recognize. Yeah.
Related question, but just like finishing with this like whole chapter. On the review guide, it says the most common objection to insanity plea.
Yeah, just that it's unfair, right? That they're not being treated fairly for the crime that they committed. So in my last last couple of thoughts here. Or I could just keep you. I'm seriously debating. Okay, so I won't see you Wednesday, right? Wednesday, we have our final exam, our third exam. It's just the last test. It's on Canvas. I will be here, and I will be here during finals week. If you want to come meet with me, maybe send me an email so we can set up a time, but I will be here. The other thing, I have a couple of people that I want to use your self-care submissions that you sent me. So Michaela, Jenna, Brett, and Alexander, if you have like 1 second after just to come check in with me, that'd be cool. But the other thing I want to say is thank you for a really awesome semester. This has been probably one of the most thoughtful, like intelligent, just wonderful classes that I've had in my time here. And I mean that, right? Like, I didn't say that because you're in my next class, and so I feel bad, right? But the level of thoughts and comments and questions in here has been amazing. I'm really sad that the semester's over. I'm not going to get emotional, right? But I'm really sad that this semester is over. I'm still here. If you want to come take another class with me, or if you just want candy, you can buy my office and say hi. I always have candy. But good luck on all of your finals. Take care of yourselves. And again, I will be here, but I won't see you after this all together, but I will be here if you want to come meet with me, right? Have a wonderful summer. Good luck on your finals. I hope I see you soon, right? All right.
See you.